If you don't want to go to the nursing home, get a job. My son Derek snapped his voice, cutting through the morning silence like a blade. I stood in his kitchen doorway, clutching my coffee mug, watching his face contort with the same impatience I'd seen for months. Outside, a black Mercedes-Benz pulled quietly to the curb. My heart skipped as I recognized the distinguished silver-haired man stepping out. Derek had no idea that 3 weeks ago I'd married Robert Wellington in a simple ceremony at City Hall. Now my new husband had come to take me home. I set down my coffee mug with steady hands, feeling a calm strength flow through me that Derek hadn't seen before. For 8 months since my husband Thomas died, I'd been living in this house where I was treated like an unwelcome burden. Thomas and I had been married 42 years when a sudden heart attack took him last spring. The foreclosure on our family home followed within weeks when his company Meridian Manufacturing declared bankruptcy and eliminated all pension obligations. Derek had grudgingly moved me into his spare bedroom, but the resentment grew thicker each day. His wife, Patricia, made sure I knew exactly how much my presence cost them. She'd count the extra groceries, calculate the increased utility bills, and sigh dramatically whenever I used the washing machine. Derek worked as a claims adjuster for Mutual Trust Insurance, earning decent money but struggling with his own mortgage payments on this cramped ranch house in suburban Columbus. "Mom, you're 71 years old." Derek continued pacing across the linoleum floor. "You can't just sit here watching television and expecting us to support you forever. Patricia and I have our own bills." What Derek didn't know was that I'd been attending grief counseling sessions at the Riverside Community Center every Tuesday and Thursday. The counselor Janet Morrison had suggested I try online support groups to connect with other widows and widowers. That's where I met Robert through a forum called New Beginnings After Loss. Robert Wellington was 72, a widower whose wife Eleanor had passed 2 years earlier from cancer. We started with simple messages about the loneliness, the empty houses, the way grief changed everything you thought you knew about yourself. Robert owned Wellington Hardware, a chain of 7 stores across Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky that his father had started in 1953. Our online friendship deepened over months of daily conversations. Robert was intelligent, kind, and genuinely interested in my thoughts about books, gardening, and life. When he suggested we meet for coffee at a neutral location, I was nervous but hopeful. That first meeting at Morrison's Diner lasted 4 hours. We talked about our late spouses, our children, our dreams for whatever years remained. The black Mercedes outside belonged to Robert. Through the kitchen window, I watched him straighten his navy suit jacket and check his watch. He was always punctual, always courteous, everything Derek had stopped being years ago. "Actually, Derek," I said, turning to face my son with a smile that made him step backward. "I did get a job. I became a wife again. 3 weeks ago, I married Robert Wellington at the Franklin County Courthouse." Derek's mouth fell open. Patricia dropped the dish towel she'd been folding and stared at me like I'd announced I was joining the circus. "You what?" Patricia shrieked, her voice rising to a pitch that could shatter glass. "You got married to who when—" "Robert Wellington. He owns Wellington Hardware stores. We've been corresponding for months through grief counseling and we fell in love. He's here now to take me to my new home." Derek sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his face pale. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just marry some stranger you met online. He's probably a scammer, some con artist who targets vulnerable old women." "He's not a stranger, Derek. We've spent more time talking in the past 6 months than you and I have in the past 6 years. And he's not interested in my money since I don't have any thanks to your father's company going under." Patricia grabbed her phone from the counter. "I'm calling my sister. Laura works for a law firm. There are laws about elder abuse and people who take advantage of seniors who aren't thinking clearly." The doorbell rang with a melodious chime. I smoothed my blue cardigan and walked to the front door, leaving Derek and Patricia standing in shocked silence. Robert stood on the doorstep holding a small bouquet of yellow roses, the same flowers he'd brought to our wedding. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his warm brown eyes crinkling with affection. "Are you ready to come home?" I've been ready for months, I replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. But I think Derek and Patricia would like to meet you first. Robert stepped into the living room, his presence immediately commanding respect. He was tall, well-built for his age, with silver hair perfectly styled and an expensive watch catching the light. His handshake was firm when Derek reluctantly stood to greet him. Mr. Morrison, I'm Robert Wellington. I want to thank you for taking care of Alyssa during her time of grief. That speaks well of your character. Derek mumbled something about it being his duty, clearly thrown off balance by Robert's polished demeanor. Patricia emerged from the kitchen, clutching her phone like a weapon. We need to see some identification, she demanded, and proof that this marriage is legitimate. Alyssa hasn't been herself since my father-in-law died. She's been confused, forgetful. She's not capable of making major life decisions right now. Robert calmly withdrew his wallet and handed over his driver's license, business cards, and our marriage certificate. Of course, I understand your concerns for Alyssa's well-being. Here's my identification information about my businesses and our marriage license from the Franklin County Clerk's office. Patricia snatched the papers and studied them intently, looking for any sign of fraud. Derek read over her shoulder, his frown deepening with each authentic document. This still doesn't prove anything, Derek said finally. My mother is vulnerable right now. She's not thinking clearly. You could have manipulated her, taken advantage of her emotional state. Derek, I said sharply, I've been thinking more clearly these past 3 weeks than I have since your father died. Robert treats me with respect and kindness. He listens to me, values my opinions, and makes me feel like a person instead of a burden. The barb hit its mark. Derek's face flushed red, and Patricia's eyes narrowed dangerously. Robert stepped closer to me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder in a gesture of protection that Derek had never offered. Perhaps we should go, darling, Robert said quietly. Your bags are already in the car. Derek's head snapped up. What bags, Mom? You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. You need to think about what you're doing. I already packed yesterday while you were at work, I explained. Just my clothes and personal items. I'm not taking anything that belongs to you. That's when Derek pulled me aside, his grip tight on my arm. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper that Robert couldn't hear from across the room. Mom listened to me very carefully. Patricia and I have already spoken to a lawyer named Harold Brennan. We're prepared to have you declared mentally incompetent if you go through with this marriage. Dad's will left you power of attorney provisions that give me control if you become unable to manage your affairs. Cancel this marriage right now, or we'll have you committed to a psychiatric facility and take control of whatever money this old fool has. The words hit me like ice water. My own son was threatening to have me institutionalized to steal from Robert. I kept my expression neutral, but inside my heart was racing with fear and anger. I see, I said calmly. You've given me a lot to think about, Derek. Perhaps Robert and I should discuss this before making any permanent decisions. Derek's smile was cold and satisfied. He thought he'd won. Derek released my arm and straightened his tie, confident that his threat had brought me back under control. I rejoined Robert in the living room, keeping my voice steady despite the shock of what my son had just revealed. Robert, Derek has raised some valid concerns about our marriage. Perhaps we should take some time to make sure we're making the right decision. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly, but he'd learned to read my expressions over months of conversation. He nodded thoughtfully. Of course, darling, major life changes deserve careful consideration. Why don't we plan to discuss this over the next few days? Patricia had been frantically texting her sister during our whispered conversation. Now she looked up with triumph. Laura says there are strict laws about elder abuse in Ohio. She's sending me information about reporting procedures and guardianship options for seniors who can't make safe decisions. That's very helpful, Robert replied diplomatically. I want Alyssa to feel completely secure in whatever choice she makes. Perhaps you could email me that information so I can review it with my own attorney. Derek's confidence faltered. Most scam artists wouldn't invite legal scrutiny. Your attorney? Margaret Foster with Foster and Associates. She handles all my business and personal legal matters. Very thorough woman, 30 years of experience in elder law. Robert handed Derek an elegant business card. Feel free to have your lawyer contact her directly. I watched Derek and Patricia exchange nervous glances. They hadn't expected Robert to be so prepared or cooperative. In the meantime, Robert continued, I'd like to invite you both to dinner at my home tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. I think it's important that Alyssa's family knows she'll be well cared for. Patricia clutched her phone tighter. We'll need your address to verify that you actually live where you claim. Of course. Robert wrote his address on another business card. 12,000 Riverside Drive. It's the white colonial with the circular driveway about 20 minutes from here. Derek's eyes widened despite himself. Riverside Drive was the most exclusive neighborhood in Columbus, where houses started at $500,000. Patricia immediately began typing the address into her phone to search for property records. After Robert left promising to call me that evening, Derek paced the living room like a caged animal. Patricia had her laptop open, frantically researching everything she could find about Robert Wellington. Mom, this is moving too fast, Derek said, trying a gentler approach. You barely know this man. What if he's after your money? What money, Derek? The house was foreclosed. Dad's pension disappeared with the company. His life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses. I have my Social Security check and about $3,000 in savings. Hardly worth an elaborate con job. Patricia looked up from her computer screen, her face pale. Derek, look at this. Robert Wellington's property is assessed at $1.2 million. Wellington Hardware had gross revenues of $8.7 million last year, according to their business filings. Derek stared at the screen over Patricia's shoulder. That doesn't make sense. Why would a millionaire want to marry my mother? Maybe because some people value qualities other than money. I suggested, but Derek wasn't listening. There has to be an angle, Derek muttered. Rich guys don't marry broke old ladies out of the kindness of their hearts. He must be planning something. That evening, Derek called Harold Brennan, Patricia's cousin, who practiced law from a strip mall office near the airport. Harold specialized in personal injury claims and small-time real estate deals, but Derek presented Alyssa's situation as if she were an heiress, being targeted by fortune hunters. I overheard the phone conversation from my bedroom where I was supposedly resting. Derek painted me as a confused, vulnerable widow who was being manipulated by a smooth-talking predator. He described my grief counseling sessions as evidence of mental instability and claimed I'd been showing signs of memory loss and poor judgment since Thomas died. Harold, we need to move fast on this, Derek said urgently. She's already married this guy. We need to get a guardianship order before he drains her bank account or changes her will. Harold's voice was tinny through the phone speaker, but I could make out his response. Derek, guardianship proceedings are serious business. We'll need medical evidence that your mother is mentally incompetent. Have you documented her decline? Medical records, witness statements, examples of poor decision-making? Patricia's been keeping notes, Derek replied, glancing toward his wife. Mom's been forgetting appointments, getting confused about simple things, acting paranoid about us trying to help her. And now this marriage to a complete stranger proves she's not capable of protecting herself. Patricia nodded eagerly, pulling out a small notebook I'd never seen before. I've been writing down every incident. Last week, she put salt in her coffee instead of sugar. She couldn't remember where she put her glasses 3 different times. She accused me of moving her medications when she forgot where she put them. My blood ran cold. Patricia had been documenting my every mistake, every moment of grief-related confusion, building a case to have me declared incompetent. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to my marriage. This had been planned for weeks, maybe months. Derek's voice dropped lower. Harold, there's something else. Dad's original will had a codicil that gives me power of attorney if Mom becomes unable to manage her own affairs. We could use that to reverse this marriage and take control of her finances. I'll need to see that document, Harold replied. But if it's properly executed, we might be able to move very quickly. The key is proving she was mentally incompetent when she signed the marriage license. if we can demonstrate that we can have the marriage annulled and establish your guardianship. Patricia leaned closer to the phone. Harold, what about the money? If this Robert Wellington guy is really rich, could we claim damages for elder abuse? Like if he took advantage of her, shouldn't he pay for therapy and care? Harold's greedy interest was audible even through the poor phone connection. Absolutely. Elder abuse cases can result in significant monetary damages, especially when wealthy defendants are involved. If we can prove exploitation, we could be looking at substantial compensation. I sat on my bed in stunned silence, understanding the full scope of their plan. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to steal from both Robert and me, using my grief and age as weapons against my autonomy. Derek saw my marriage not as a threat to my well-being, but as an opportunity to get rich through fraudulent legal action. The next morning, Patricia made a series of phone calls while Derek was at work. I pretended to nap on the couch, but listened as she contacted my doctor's office, my dentist, and even the grief counselor at the community center. "This is Patricia Morrison calling about Alyssa Morrison's medical records," she said smoothly. "I'm her daughter-in-law and primary caregiver since her husband passed. We're concerned about her mental state and need documentation of her cognitive decline for legal purposes." Each call followed the same pattern. Patricia presented herself as my responsible caregiver, expressed concerns about my mental fitness, and requested records that would support a competency hearing. She was building a medical case to complement the behavioral evidence in her notebook. When Patricia called Janet Morrison, the grief counselor, I could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough to understand that Patricia was trying to get Janet to confirm that I was emotionally unstable and vulnerable to manipulation. "Yes, she's been attending your sessions for months," Patricia said. "We're worried that she's not processing her grief in a healthy way. Has she mentioned any online relationships or plans to remarry? Because she's gotten involved with a man she met on the internet and we're concerned she's being taken advantage of." I realized that Derek and Patricia had been planning this guardianship scheme long before I met Robert. They'd been positioning themselves as my protectors while documenting my supposed incompetence, waiting for the right moment to seize control of my life and finances. The most chilling part was how methodical they were being. This wasn't an emotional overreaction to my marriage. This was a calculated legal strategy designed to steal my freedom and my husband's money. That afternoon, Robert called as promised, and I carefully explained what I'd overheard without revealing the full extent of Derek's threats. Robert listened thoughtfully, asking specific questions about Harold Brennan and the supposed evidence Patricia had been collecting. "Alyssa, this sounds like a sophisticated elder abuse scheme," Robert said gravely. "I've seen similar cases through my business connections. Would you be comfortable if I had someone investigate Derek and Patricia's financial situation? Sometimes, these guardianship scams are motivated by desperate money problems." I agreed, immediately grateful to have someone take my concerns seriously instead of dismissing them as paranoid delusions. Robert explained that he knew a private investigator named James Crawford who specialized in financial fraud cases. James had helped Robert's business partners expose embezzlement attempts and insurance fraud over the years. 2 days later, Robert arrived at Derek's house for our scheduled dinner meeting, but he brought disturbing news. James Crawford had discovered that Derek was in far worse financial trouble than anyone realized. "Derek owes $47,000 on credit cards," Robert explained quietly as we sat in his Mercedes before going inside. "His mortgage is 3 months behind and the bank has started foreclosure proceedings. Patricia's salary at the dental office isn't enough to cover their basic expenses, let alone the debt payments." But the most shocking discovery came when James investigated Derek's access to my financial accounts. Using his father's death certificate and a forged power of attorney document, Derek had convinced Mutual Benefit Life Insurance to release Thomas's life insurance payout directly to him instead of me. "Alyssa, your husband's life insurance policy paid $25,000 after his death. Derek told the insurance company that you were too distraught to handle the paperwork and that he had legal authority to manage your affairs. He deposited that money into his personal checking account 7 months ago." The room seemed to spin around me. Derek had stolen $25,000 that rightfully belonged to me, money that could have prevented the foreclosure on my family home, money that would have made me financially independent instead of dependent on his grudging charity. "There's more," Robert continued gently. "Patricia has been calling your doctors and presenting herself as your primary caregiver. She's requested copies of your medical records, claiming she needs them to coordinate your care. But she's also been suggesting to medical staff that you're showing signs of cognitive decline and that the family is concerned about your ability to make decisions." I felt sick. My son and daughter-in-law had been systematically building a fraudulent case against me while stealing money that could have given me the independence they claimed I lacked. Robert reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. James also discovered something troubling about Harold Brennan. He's been suspended twice by the Ohio State Bar for unethical practices, and he's currently under investigation for overbilling clients and mishandling trust funds. He's also Patricia's first cousin, which means this is a family conspiracy. The dinner at Derek's house that evening was surreal. Derek and Patricia played the role of concerned family members, asking probing questions about Robert's business, his previous marriage, and his intentions toward me. They were clearly fishing for information they could use against us in court. Patricia had prepared an elaborate meal, obviously trying to impress Robert with her domestic skills, while subtly undermining my capabilities. "Alyssa, honey, you forgot to take your evening medications again," she said pointedly during dinner. "I've been helping her keep track of her pills since she moved in with us. Sometimes she gets confused about the dosages." I had no evening medications. Patricia was fabricating evidence in front of witnesses. Derek played his part perfectly, expressing touching concern about my welfare, while painting himself as a devoted son, sacrificing to care for his aging mother. "It's been challenging since Dad died," he said sadly. "Mom's not the same person she used to be. Sometimes she forgets conversations we had just hours earlier, or she'll get angry about things that never happened." Robert nodded sympathetically while taking mental notes of every lie. After dinner, Derek asked to speak with Robert privately in the living room, while Patricia kept me busy in the kitchen. "I need to be honest with you, Mr. Wellington," Derek said in a confidential tone. "My mother has been struggling with depression and confusion since my father's death. Her grief counselor has recommended medication for anxiety and mood stabilization, but Mom refuses to take it consistently. Sometimes she lives in a fantasy world where everything is fine." Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Derek pulling out Patricia's notebook and showing selected pages to Robert. "My wife has been documenting Mom's episodes for the past several months. Memory lapses, emotional outbursts, poor decision-making. We've been trying to get her the help she needs, but she's resistant to our suggestions." Robert examined the notebook with apparent interest while Derek continued his performance. "This marriage idea seems to come out of nowhere. Mom's never mentioned you before this week. We're worried that someone might be taking advantage of her vulnerability, whether intentionally or not." What Derek didn't know was that Robert was wearing a small recording device capturing every word of this elaborate deception. Margaret Foster had suggested documenting any attempts at manipulation or fraud for potential criminal charges. When we returned home that evening, Robert played back the recording while I listened in amazement to my son's convincing portrayal of a caring family member protecting his declining mother from exploitation. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. "Alyssa, this is criminal elder abuse," Robert said firmly. "They've stolen money from you, forged legal documents, and they're building a fraudulent competency case to gain control of your finances. We need to involve law enforcement." The next morning, James Crawford delivered his complete investigative report. The evidence was overwhelming. Derek had forged my signature on the insurance claim forms. Patricia had been calling my medical providers and spreading false information about my mental state. Harold Brennan had already filed preliminary paperwork with the probate court claiming I was in need of guardianship protection. Most disturbing of all, James had discovered that Derek and Patricia had been discussing their plan in detail over social media messages, treating my supposed incompetence as a business opportunity. Patricia had texted her sister, If we can get guardianship over Alyssa, we'll control whatever money this rich guy has access to. Derek says old people's marriages can be easily annulled if there's proof of diminished capacity. Derek had responded to a friend's financial troubles with, "Don't worry about the foreclosure. My mom just married some millionaire and we're going to prove she's not mentally fit to make that kind of decision. Once I'm her legal guardian, I'll have control over all her assets." They weren't just planning to steal from me. They were planning to use guardianship laws to gain access to Robert's wealth through fraudulent claims of mental incompetence. I moved into Robert's beautiful estate on Riverside Drive while maintaining the pretense that I was still considering Derek's concerns about our marriage. Robert's home was everything Derek's cramped ranch wasn't: spacious, elegant, and filled with warmth and natural light. The master suite had a sitting area overlooking gardens, where Eleanor had grown prize-winning roses. Robert had preserved her plantings as a memorial, but he encouraged me to add my own touches. Each day I drove back to Derek's house to discuss my marriage and consider his advice about protecting myself from potential exploitation. These visits gave me opportunities to document their ongoing deception while pretending to be the confused, manipulable woman they believed me to be. Margaret Foster had explained exactly what Derek was attempting. "Guardianship abuse is more common than people realize," she said during our first consultation. "Adult children convince courts that their parents are incompetent, then use legal guardianship to control assets, living situations, and medical decisions. It's particularly effective against widows who are isolated and grieving." Margaret provided me with sophisticated recording equipment that looked like ordinary jewelry and accessories. A brooch contained a digital recorder, while my watch had a tiny camera. Everything Derek and Patricia said during my visits was being documented for potential criminal prosecution. Robert, meanwhile, was using his business connections to investigate the full scope of their financial crimes. His accountant, Linda Chen, had discovered that Derek was claiming me as a dependent on his tax returns, while simultaneously collecting the insurance money that should have gone to me. This constituted tax fraud in addition to insurance fraud. The most shocking discovery came during my third week of secret investigations. I had been feeling unusually foggy and confused after eating lunch at Derek's house, but completely clear and energetic at Robert's estate. Robert suggested we have my food tested after I mentioned feeling disoriented, only on days when I ate meals Patricia prepared. Dr. Sarah Mitchell Roberts' personal physician arranged for discreet blood and urine testing after one of my visits to Derek's house. The results were alarming. I had significant levels of lorazepam in my system, an anxiety medication that I had never been prescribed. "Someone has been drugging you," Dr. Mitchell explained grimly. "The dosage isn't dangerous, but it's enough to cause confusion, memory problems, and disorientation. Long-term exposure could create the very symptoms of cognitive decline that someone might use to prove mental incompetence." Patricia worked as a dental hygienist and had access to various medications through her workplace. She'd been systematically poisoning my food to create evidence of my supposed mental deterioration. Every confused moment Derek had described to Harold Brennan, every memory lapse Patricia had documented in her notebook, had been artificially induced through medication. James Crawford confirmed that Patricia had been stealing lorazepam from the dental practice where she worked. Security camera footage showed her taking medications from the supply cabinet and falsifying inventory records to cover the theft. Dr. Mitchell calculated that I had been drugged consistently for at least 4 months, explaining why I'd felt increasingly confused and disoriented while living in Derek's house. Robert was furious. "Alyssa, they've been poisoning you to create evidence for their guardianship case. This isn't just financial fraud anymore. This is assault, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit multiple felonies." Margaret Foster agreed. "We have enough evidence for criminal charges, insurance fraud, forgery, identity theft, elder abuse, unlawful administration of controlled substances, and conspiracy. But I want to catch them in the act of filing false statements with the court. Once they submit fraudulent guardianship paperwork under oath, we'll have them for perjury and filing false legal documents." We developed a careful strategy. I would continue my visits to Derek's house, pretending to be gradually convinced by their arguments about the dangers of my marriage. Meanwhile, we would document every lie, every forged document, and every attempt to manipulate the legal system. Derek and Patricia, believing their plan was working, became increasingly bold about their intentions. During one recorded conversation, Patricia laughed about how easy it was to fool doctors into believing I was mentally declining. I just call them up, say I'm worried about Alyssa's memory and judgment, and they immediately start talking about cognitive assessments and competency evaluations, she bragged to Derek. Medical professionals are so afraid of liability that they'll support a guardianship petition just to cover themselves. Derek was equally confident about their legal strategy. Harold says once we get temporary guardianship, I can annul Mom's marriage and file suit against Robert Wellington for elder abuse and exploitation. Even if we can't prove he deliberately targeted her, we can claim he should have known she wasn't capable of making marriage decisions. They were planning to steal not only from me, but from Robert, using fraudulent guardianship laws as their weapon. The irony was breathtaking. They were committing actual elder abuse while claiming to protect me from imaginary exploitation. Robert and I spent our evenings planning our counterattack while growing closer as a genuine couple. Despite the criminal behavior of my son and daughter-in-law, I was happier than I'd been since Thomas's death. Robert treated me with respect, affection, and intellectual equality. Our conversations ranged from business strategies to literature to plans for traveling together once the legal situation was resolved. I keep thinking about the contrast, I told Robert one evening as we sat in his library. Derek claims he's protecting me while he's actually poisoning me and stealing from me. You're accused of exploiting me while you're actually giving me the tools to fight back and protect myself. Robert took my hand gently. Alyssa, I fell in love with your intelligence, your strength, and your kindness. The idea that someone would try to have you declared incompetent is not just criminal, it's absurd. You're one of the sharpest people I know. Margaret Foster had scheduled our trap for the following Monday. Derek believed he was meeting with Harold Brennan to finalize guardianship papers and annul my marriage. What he didn't know was that Detective Sarah Martinez from the Elder Abuse Unit would be present to witness his confession and that every word would be recorded for prosecution. Once Derek signs those fraudulent legal documents in front of a police officer, we'll have everything we need for criminal charges, Margaret explained. Insurance fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and perjury. He'll be facing federal charges and significant prison time. I felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. My son had chosen greed over love, deception over honesty, criminality over family loyalty. But I was no longer the helpless victim he thought he was manipulating. I was a woman with resources, allies, and the legal system on my side. Derek's trap was set. He just didn't know it yet. On Friday morning, I called Derek with trembling hands that weren't entirely fake. The stress of maintaining my charade while gathering evidence was taking its toll, but I needed Derek to believe he was finally breaking through my resistance. Derek, I need to see you, I said, allowing my voice to quaver with emotion. I've been thinking about everything you said about Robert, and I'm scared. What if you're right? What if I'm making a terrible mistake? Derek's voice immediately shifted to false concern. Mom, I'm so glad you called. Patricia and I have been worried sick about you. We just want what's best for you. I don't know what to do. I continued playing the confused elderly woman Derek expected me to be. Robert keeps talking about changing my will and setting up joint bank accounts. Yesterday, he asked me to sign some papers about his business, and I didn't understand what they meant. This was completely fabricated. Robert had been scrupulously careful not to involve me in any financial arrangements that Derek could later claim were exploitative. But I knew Derek would seize on any suggestion that Robert was after my money. Mom listened to me very carefully, Derek said urgently. Don't sign anything else until we can have Harold Brennan review it. And don't let Robert pressure you into making any more legal commitments. Can you come over this afternoon so we can talk about protecting yourself? Yes, I replied with apparent relief. I think I need help, Derek. I don't want to end up like those old ladies you see on the news who lose everything to con artists. That afternoon, Derek and Patricia welcomed me with fake warmth that made my skin crawl. Patricia had prepared my favorite soup, the same soup she'd been drugging for months, and insisted I eat a full bowl while we talked. Alyssa, honey, you look so much better today, Patricia said with syrupy sweetness. I think getting some distance from that Robert person is already helping you think more clearly. I forced myself to eat the contaminated soup, knowing that Dr. Mitchell would be testing my blood levels afterward to document the ongoing poisoning. The lorazepam made me feel slightly dizzy and confused within 30 minutes, but I used those genuine symptoms to convince Derek that I was ready to abandon my marriage. I keep trying to remember why I thought marrying Robert was a good idea, I said, rubbing my forehead as the medication took effect. Everything feels so fuzzy lately. Maybe you're right about my judgment being off. Derek exchanged a satisfied glance with Patricia. The drugged soup was working exactly as they'd planned, creating the confused mental state they needed to document for their guardianship case. Mom, Patricia, and I have been doing some research on this Robert Wellington, Derek said gently. We found some concerning information that suggests he might not be the man he claims to be. This was news to me. I leaned forward with apparent anxiety. What kind of concerning information? Patricia pulled out a folder she'd obviously prepared in advance. We hired a private investigator to look into his background. It turns out Robert has been married 3 times, not just once like he told you. His first wife died in a suspicious car accident, and he collected a large insurance settlement. I stared at them in amazement. They were fabricating an entire false background for Robert, creating fictional evidence of predatory behavior to justify their guardianship petition. The private investigator was probably another invention, but the lies sounded convincing enough to fool someone who was genuinely confused and drugged. There's more, Derek continued gravely. The investigator found records showing Robert has been involved in several lawsuits with elderly women who claimed he exploited them financially. The cases were settled out of court, which suggests he paid them off to avoid criminal charges. None of this was true, but Derek delivered the lies with such conviction that I could see how an actual confused elderly person might be completely convinced. They had crafted a perfect psychological manipulation designed to destroy my trust in Robert, while making me grateful for their protection. What should I do? I asked weakly, allowing the lorazepam to make me appear genuinely distressed and uncertain. We need to move quickly, Derek said. Harold Brennan says we can file for emergency guardianship if we can demonstrate that you're in immediate danger of financial exploitation. Once I'm your legal guardian, I can annul this marriage and protect your assets from Robert's schemes. Patricia leaned closer, her voice full of fake compassion. Alyssa, I know this is scary, but Derek is the only one who can protect you now. We've already started the legal paperwork to make sure Robert can't hurt you anymore. They explained their plan with remarkable honesty, apparently confident that the drugged soup had left me too confused to fully understand or remember their admissions. Derek would meet with Harold Brennan on Monday morning to sign the emergency guardianship petition. They had already prepared medical statements from Patricia, claiming I was showing signs of severe cognitive decline and had been making increasingly dangerous decisions. The beautiful thing about emergency guardianship, Derek explained, is that the court can act quickly to protect vulnerable adults. Once I'm your guardian, I'll have complete legal authority over your finances, your living situation, and your medical care. I can move you to a nice assisted living facility where you'll be safe from predators like Robert. I nodded weakly, pretending to be grateful for their protection while secretly recording every word of their conspiracy. They were planning to have me institutionalized against my will while stealing both my freedom and Robert's money through fraudulent legal proceedings. Patricia brought me another bowl of the drugged soup, insisting I needed to keep my strength up for the difficult days ahead. I've already talked to Sunset Manor about getting you a room, she said cheerfully. It's a lovely facility with 24-hour nursing care. You'll be much happier there than trying to manage an independent lifestyle you're not capable of handling anymore. Derek pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "Mom, I need you to sign these papers giving me temporary power of attorney. It's just a precaution until we can get the formal guardianship approved by the court." I stared at the papers through the haze of medication, pretending to struggle with comprehension while actually reading every word. The documents would give Derek immediate control over my bank accounts, my Social Security benefits, and any assets from my marriage to Robert. Once signed, I would be financially helpless even before the guardianship hearing. "I'm so confused," I mumbled, playing my role perfectly. "Maybe I should wait and think about this more." "Mom, we don't have time to wait," Derek said with fake urgency. "Harold says Robert could drain your accounts or change your will at any time. We need legal protection in place immediately." Patricia handed me a pen with motherly encouragement. "Just sign where Derek shows you honey. We're family. We'll never let anyone hurt you." I took the pen with shaking hands, then suddenly stopped. "Derek, I want to call Robert and tell him about canceling our marriage. He deserves to hear it from me directly." Derek's face tightened with alarm. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Robert might try to talk you out of protecting yourself. Why don't we handle the legal matters first, then worry about explanations later?" "No," I said with sudden firmness that surprised them both. "I won't sign anything until I've talked to Robert. That's only fair." Derek and Patricia exchanged worried glances. They had expected me to be more compliant after the drugged soup, but I was showing unexpected resistance to their pressure tactics. "Okay, Mom," Derek said finally. "You can call Robert tonight, but let's meet with Harold Brennan on Monday morning so you can understand your legal options. You don't have to sign anything until you're completely comfortable with the decision." I agreed to the Monday meeting knowing it would be the trap that destroyed their conspiracy. Derek believed he was manipulating a confused old woman into signing away her rights. What he didn't know was that he was walking into a carefully planned sting operation that would expose every aspect of his criminal behavior. Margaret Foster had arranged for Detective Sarah Martinez to pose as a legal assistant in Harold Brennan's office. Every word Derek spoke, every document he signed, every lie he told would be recorded for criminal prosecution. By Monday afternoon, Derek would be under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. I left Derek's house that evening with satisfied anticipation. After months of being treated like a burden and a victim, I was finally ready to fight back with the full power of the legal system behind me. My son was about to learn that underestimating a 71-year-old woman was the biggest mistake of his criminal career. Monday morning arrived with crisp October air and brilliant sunshine, perfect weather for justice. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that Robert had bought me, wanting to look dignified and competent for what would likely be Derek's last day of freedom. Margaret Foster had briefed me extensively on the sting operation. Detective Sarah Martinez would be present in Harold Brennan's office, introduced as a legal assistant named Jennifer Walsh. She would be wearing recording equipment and carrying a briefcase full of monitoring devices. Harold's office had been selected specifically because it was small and isolated, minimizing the risk of innocent bystanders being affected when arrests were made. Robert drove me to the meeting, his presence calm and reassuring despite the tension of the situation. "Are you ready for this, darling?" he asked, as we pulled into the strip mall parking lot where Harold Brennan practiced law between a discount tire store and a tax preparation service. "I've been ready for months," I replied firmly. "Derek chose to treat me like an enemy instead of his mother. Now he gets to face the consequences." Inside Harold Brennan's cramped office, Derek was already waiting with barely contained excitement. He dressed in his best suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably contained all the forged documents and fabricated evidence Patricia had helped him prepare. Harold Brennan was exactly what I'd expected, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, cheap cologne, and the hungry eyes of someone who saw every client as a potential payday. His law degree hung crookedly on the wood-paneled wall next to a motivational poster about success that looked like it had been purchased at a gas station. "Mrs. Morrison," Harold said with oily charm, "Derek has explained your situation, and I want you to know we're here to protect your interests. These elder abuse cases can be very complex, but we have experience handling predatory individuals who target vulnerable seniors. Detective Martinez, introduced as Jennifer Walsh, sat quietly at a small desk with a laptop computer, apparently taking notes, but actually monitoring recording equipment. She looked exactly like what she claimed to be a competent legal assistant in a conservative business suit with a professional demeanor. Derek immediately launched into his rehearsed presentation about my supposed cognitive decline and Robert's alleged exploitation. He spread Patricia's notebook across Harold's desk, pointing to documented incidents of confusion and poor judgment that had supposedly occurred over the past several months. "Oh, as you can see," Derek said earnestly, "my mother has been deteriorating rapidly since my father's death. She's forgotten appointments, made irrational accusations against family members, and now she's married a complete stranger she met on the internet." Harold nodded sympathetically while Detective Martinez typed notes that were actually signals to backup officers waiting outside. Everything Derek said was being recorded for criminal prosecution. "Derek has brought the original power of attorney documents from your late husband's will," Harold explained to me. "These give him legal authority to make decisions on your behalf if you become unable to manage your own affairs. Based on the evidence he's presented, I believe we have grounds for emergency guardianship." I played my role perfectly, appearing confused and overwhelmed by the legal complexity, while actually understanding every nuance of their fraudulent scheme. "I just want to do what's right," I said weakly. "I don't want to be taken advantage of by anyone." Derek leaned forward with fake compassion. "Mom, I know this is difficult, but Robert Wellington isn't the man he pretends to be. We've discovered he's been involved in similar schemes with other elderly women. He specifically targets widows who are vulnerable and isolated." This was the moment we'd been waiting for. Derek was repeating the fabricated stories about Robert's background, creating recorded evidence of deliberate fraud and defamation. Detective Martinez's fingers moved quickly across her laptop keyboard, signaling that backup units should move closer to the building. Harold spread several documents across his desk with theatrical flourish. "Mrs. Morrison, these papers will transfer temporary guardianship to Derek while we investigate Robert Wellington's background and motives. It's purely protective. We're not taking away your rights, just ensuring you have qualified legal representation during this vulnerable period." I picked up the papers with trembling hands, pretending to struggle with comprehension while actually reading every line of the criminal conspiracy Derek was asking me to sign. The documents would give him complete control over my finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. I would become a legal prisoner in whatever facility he chose while he drained Robert's accounts through fraudulent damage claims. "Harold," Derek said confidently, "show my mother the financial analysis we've prepared. I want her to understand how much money she could lose if we don't act quickly." Harold pulled out a folder containing fabricated financial projections, showing how Robert could potentially steal hundreds of thousands of dollars through various schemes involving joint accounts, revised wills, and business partnerships. None of it was based on any actual evidence, but it looked official enough to frighten a genuinely confused elderly person. "Based on our investigation," Harold lied smoothly, "Robert Wellington has likely targeted your mother because he believes she has access to significant assets through her late husband's estate. He may not realize that the family lost everything in the Meridian Manufacturing bankruptcy, but by the time he discovers the truth, he could have already transferred substantial sums from his own accounts in her name, then claimed she authorized the transactions." Derek nodded eagerly. "That's why we need to move fast. Once I'm Mom's guardian, I can freeze all financial activity and prevent Robert from executing whatever scheme he's planning." Detective Martinez looked up from her laptop with apparent interest. "Mr. Brennan, could you explain how guardianship would affect Mrs. Morrison's existing marriage? Would Derek have authority to make decisions about her personal relationships?" Harold's answer revealed the full scope of their criminal intentions. "Absolutely. As guardian, Derek would have complete authority over Alyssa's personal affairs, including the right to petition for annulment of any marriage entered into while she was mentally incompetent. We could also pursue civil damages against Robert Wellington for elder abuse and financial exploitation. Derek's smile was cold and satisfied. The beautiful thing is that it doesn't matter whether Robert actually intended to defraud my mother. The fact that he married someone who was clearly not capable of making rational decisions makes him liable for damages regardless of his motives. I stared at my son in amazement. He was planning to destroy Robert's life and steal his money through completely fabricated legal claims, using my supposed incompetence as a weapon against an innocent man who had shown me nothing but kindness and respect. "How much money are we talking about?" Derek asked greedily. "If Robert Wellington is worth as much as we think, what kind of settlement could we expect?" Harold's eyes gleamed with avarice. Elder abuse cases involving wealthy defendants often settle for millions of dollars. Even if we can't prove intentional fraud, the emotional distress and exploitation damages could be substantial. I'd estimate anywhere from $2 to $5 million, depending on how aggressively we pursue the case. Detective Martinez stood up suddenly, her laptop computer closing with a decisive snap. "Gentlemen, I think we've heard enough." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew her police badge and service weapon, placing both on Harold's desk with calm authority. "I'm Detective Sarah Martinez with the Columbus Police Department Elder Abuse Unit. Derek Morrison and Harold Brennan, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse insurance fraud forgery and filing false legal documents." The color drained from Derek's face as the office door opened and two uniformed officers entered. Harold Brennan started to protest, but Detective Martinez cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Everything you've said in this meeting has been recorded," she explained calmly. "We have documented evidence of your conspiracy to have Mrs. Morrison fraudulently declared incompetent, your plans to steal from both her and Robert Wellington, and your intention to file false legal documents with the court." Derek's voice rose to a panicked squeal. "This is entrapment. You can't arrest me for trying to protect my mother from a con artist." Detective Martinez handcuffed Derek with professional efficiency. "Mr. Morrison, your mother is a competent adult who has never shown any signs of mental incompetence. We have medical evidence that you and your wife have been systematically drugging her food to create artificial symptoms of cognitive decline. We also have financial records showing you stole $25,000 from her insurance settlement using forged documents." As Derek was led away in handcuffs, his final words were a stream of curses and threats directed at me. "You'll regret this, Mom. I'm your only family. Without me, you'll have nobody when that rich bastard dumps you." Harold Brennan tried to claim ignorance about Derek's criminal activities, but Detective Martinez had recorded evidence of his knowing participation in the conspiracy. He was arrested as an accessory to fraud and conspiracy to file false legal documents. The news media picked up the story within hours. Local insurance adjuster arrested in elder abuse scheme became front-page news in the Columbus Dispatch, complete with photos of Derek being led from his workplace in handcuffs. His employer, Mutual Trust Insurance, immediately terminated his employment for criminal conduct and ethical violations. Patricia was arrested at her dental office that same afternoon on charges of theft of controlled substances and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The security camera footage of her stealing medications was played on local television news, leading to her immediate dismissal and the suspension of her dental hygiene license. Derek and Patricia's financial desperation became public record during the bail hearing. Their house was already in foreclosure, their credit cards were maxed out, and Derek owed back taxes to the Internal Revenue Service. The judge denied bail, ruling that they posed a continued threat to elderly community members and had demonstrated sophisticated planning capabilities that made them flight risks. The most satisfying moment came when Derek's co-workers and neighbors learned the full scope of his crimes. The man who had portrayed himself as a devoted son sacrificing to care for his aging mother was revealed as a cold-blooded predator who had poisoned and robbed the woman who gave him life. Social media exploded with outrage over Derek's betrayal. His Facebook page was flooded with angry comments from friends and former colleagues who couldn't believe someone could be so heartless toward their own mother. Patricia's Instagram account received similar treatment with particular fury directed at her smiling family photos that had concealed months of criminal conspiracy. The Columbus Police Department used the case as an example in their elder abuse prevention seminars, showing how sophisticated guardianship scams could target any family regardless of social or economic status. Detective Martinez appeared on local television to warn seniors about the warning signs of financial exploitation by family members. Derek's sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Prosecutors were seeking the maximum penalty for elder abuse, 4 years in federal prison, plus substantial fines and restitution. Patricia faced 2 years for her role in the conspiracy, and Harold Brennan was looking at disbarment and possible criminal charges for professional misconduct. 6 weeks later, I sat in the front row of the federal courthouse as Judge Patricia Williams delivered Derek's sentence. 4 years in federal prison for elder abuse conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and filing false legal documents. Patricia received 2 years for her participation in the conspiracy and theft of controlled substances. Harold Brennan lost his law license permanently and received 18 months for professional misconduct and conspiracy. The judge's words were particularly harsh for Derek. "Mr. Morrison, you have committed one of the most despicable crimes imaginable, exploiting and abusing the mother who raised you, loved you, and trusted you. You poisoned her food, stole her money, forged legal documents, and attempted to have her declared mentally incompetent for your own financial gain. The court finds your behavior particularly egregious because it involved systematic planning and manipulation of vulnerable adult protection laws designed to help seniors not exploit them." Derek attempted to give a remorseful speech about being driven to desperation by financial pressure, but Judge Williams cut him short. "Mr. Morrison, your financial problems do not excuse poisoning your elderly mother or attempting to steal from her husband. Many people face economic hardship without turning to elder abuse. Your actions show a complete lack of moral character and pose a continuing danger to the elderly community." The restitution amounts were staggering. Derek was ordered to repay $25,000 in stolen insurance money plus interest and penalties, totaling $38,000. Patricia owed $17,000 for the cost of medical testing and treatment related to her systematic poisoning of my food. Harold Brennan faced civil liability for professional malpractice that could reach into 6 figures. Their house was sold at foreclosure auction to partially satisfy the restitution orders, but Derek and Patricia would be paying court-ordered debt for years after their release from prison. Their credit was destroyed, their professional licenses revoked, and their reputations permanently tainted by criminal convictions for elder abuse. Most satisfying of all, their conspiracy had backfired completely. Instead of making them rich, their criminal scheme had cost them everything they owned and landed them in federal prison. They had lost their freedom, their finances, their careers, and their standing in the community because they chose greed over love. Meanwhile, my life with Robert had flourished beyond anything I could have imagined. We honeymooned in Ireland, visiting castles and gardens that reminded us both of the beauty possible in later life. Robert's estate became truly ours as I added my own touches to Eleanor's memorial gardens and created a library space filled with my favorite books and comfortable reading chairs. But the most meaningful development was the work that grew from my experience with Derek's abuse. Margaret Foster and I established the Alyssa Morrison Elder Protection Foundation, using my story to educate families about guardianship abuse and financial exploitation of seniors. We spoke at community centers, senior housing facilities, and family law seminars about the warning signs of elder abuse and the legal resources available to protect vulnerable adults. Detective Sarah Martinez became a close friend and frequent collaborator in our educational efforts. Together, we developed training materials for law enforcement officers, healthcare workers, and legal professionals about recognizing and investigating elder abuse cases. The foundation helped pass stronger legislation requiring medical evaluation and independent legal representation before guardianship petitions could be approved. Our most successful program was the Family Financial Safety Workshop that taught seniors how to protect themselves from exploitation by relatives or caregivers. We explained the importance of maintaining separate bank accounts requiring multiple signatures for major financial decisions and establishing advance directives that reflected their own wishes rather than family pressure. Within 2 years, the foundation had helped over 300 seniors escape abusive situations or protect themselves from potential exploitation. We provided legal referrals, financial counseling, and emotional support for elderly victims of family fraud and abuse. Many cases involved adult children who had convinced courts to grant inappropriate guardianship orders, then use their legal authority to steal assets and control their parents' lives. Robert proved to be not only a loving husband, but an enthusiastic partner in our advocacy work. His business experience and financial resources made him an effective board member and strategic planner for foundation activities. Together, we created a model for how second marriages later in life could be partnerships of mutual support and shared purpose, rather than mere convenience arrangements. Our marriage became stronger each year as we traveled together, worked together, and built a life based on respect and genuine affection. Robert never tried to control my decisions or limit my independence. Instead, he supported my goals and encouraged me to pursue interests I had set aside during my first marriage. I took college courses in psychology and social work, earned certification as a victim advocate, and even testified before the state legislature about elder abuse prevention. The contrast with Derek's treatment was profound. My son had seen me as a burden to be managed and a resource to be exploited. Robert saw me as an intelligent partner whose opinions mattered and whose happiness was important. Derek had tried to make me dependent and helpless. Robert helped me become more independent and empowered than I had ever been. 3 years after Derek's sentencing, I received a letter from him in federal prison. He claimed to have found religion and wanted forgiveness for his crimes against me. The letter was full of self-pity and excuses, blaming his actions on financial pressure, Patricia's influence, and his own grief over losing Thomas. I read the letter carefully, then placed it in my fireplace and watched it burn. Derek had chosen to poison me, steal from me, and attempt to have me institutionalized. His crimes weren't mistakes or momentary lapses in judgment. They were calculated systematic abuse that continued for months. Forgiveness might be possible someday, but trust could never be restored. Patricia also wrote occasionally, usually requesting money for commissary items or legal fees, for appeals that were consistently denied. I didn't respond to her letters either. She had participated willingly in every aspect of Derek's conspiracy, from stealing medications to forged documents to planning my false imprisonment. Her tears in court had been for her own consequences, not for the pain she had caused me. Robert and I celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary with a trip to Alaska, something I had always wanted to do but never had the opportunity or resources to pursue during my first marriage. We saw glaciers, wildlife, and landscapes that reminded me how much life still had to offer at 76 years old. The foundation continued to grow and expand its services. We opened a second office in Cleveland and began working with elder law attorneys across Ohio to identify and prosecute guardianship abuse cases. Our educational programs reach thousands of seniors, annually teaching them to recognize warning signs of exploitation and understand their legal rights. I often thought about the irony of Derek's crimes. He had tried to convince the world that I was incompetent and vulnerable, in need of protection from predatory strangers. In reality, the only predator in my life was my own son, and I had proven more than capable of protecting myself once I understood what was happening. Derek had underestimated my intelligence, my resilience, and my capacity to fight back when threatened. He saw an elderly widow and assumed I would be easy to manipulate and control. Instead, he discovered that age had made me wiser, more careful and more determined to protect the independence I had worked 71 years to achieve. The most important lesson I learned was that being someone's mother doesn't mean accepting abuse from them. Family relationships require mutual respect and genuine care, not just biological connection. When Derek chose to treat me as an enemy and a victim, he forfeited any claim to my loyalty or forgiveness. But I also learned that it's never too late to find love, purpose, and happiness. Robert showed me that marriage could be a partnership of equals rather than a caregiving arrangement. Our work with the foundation gave me a sense of purpose and accomplishment that I had never experienced during my years as a traditional housewife. Most importantly, I learned that seniors have more power and resources than society often acknowledges. We're not helpless victims waiting for younger people to make decisions for us. We're adults with decades of life experience, accumulated wisdom, and the legal right to make our own choices about our finances, our relationships, and our futures. Derek's criminal conspiracy had been designed to steal my autonomy and reduce me to a dependent ward of his guardianship. Instead, his crimes had forced me to become stronger, more independent, and more determined than I had ever been. He thought he was exploiting a vulnerable elderly woman. Instead, he had awakened a fierce advocate for justice, who was determined to protect other seniors from similar abuse. Today, at 78 years old, I'm healthier, happier, and more purposeful than I was at 68. Robert and I have traveled to 6 countries, helped hundreds of elder abuse victims, and built a marriage based on love rather than convenience. The foundation has become a respected voice for senior rights and protection. Derek remains in federal prison, his appeals exhausted, and his reputation permanently destroyed. Patricia was released after 18 months but struggles to find employment with her criminal record and suspended professional licenses. They chose greed over love, deception over honesty, and crime over family loyalty. Now they're living with the consequences of those choices. I chose justice over silence, strength over victimhood, and hope over bitterness. The difference in our outcomes speaks for itself. As I finish writing this story, I want to ask you a question that goes to the heart of everything I've learned. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to control or exploit you? How did you find the courage to fight back when the people who should have protected you became the ones you needed protection from? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting other seniors who might be facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the reality of elder abuse and the importance of fighting back against exploitation. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power, protect your rights, and build the life you deserve. Age is not a weakness. It's a strength that comes from surviving everything life has thrown at you and still choosing to hope for better days ahead. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that being older means being powerless. You have more strength than you know, and there are people ready to help you use it.